Welcome. I am Laura Barbas Rhoden. I am really thrilled to welcome all of you here tonight for this virtual event hosted by my department, Modern Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at Wofford College. We're really honored to have James Rojas joining us from California, as you've seen in the chat, in dialogue with Alianza Spartanburg facilitator and USC Upstate professor Araceli Hernandez LaRoche. A couple of you asked about Alianza Spartanburg. We're a social impact network, completely volunteers that work in advocacy and community building to foster and encourage the inclusion of Latino, Latina, Latinx residents in improving the quality of life here. So an absolutely appropriate topic and guest to have James Rojas talking about Latino urbanism and enhancing the US landscape. So logistical items, feel free to keep using the chat and the Q&A if you'd like to pose a question for James. He's agreed to take some questions at the end of his talk. You can write those anytime, and Araceli and I will work to make sure some of those get to him for answering at the end. And now it's my extraordinary pleasure to introduce a person with whom I'm proud to co-labor in Spartanburg and in the profession of modern languages. Araceli Hernandez LaRoche serves as a facilitator and steering team member for Alianza Spartanburg, and she's a member of the Executive Committee for the Associated Departments of Foreign Languages, ADFL, and Modern Language Association. She also sits on a number of local boards, including the Spartanburg Academic Movement and the Chapman Cultural Center. We're thrilled to have folks from the community join us from those organizations. And I have to say, Araceli's work epitomizes the best of public engagement and a commitment to uplifting the voices of others, fostering opportunity, and advocating for equity, inclusion, and more thriving communities. So without further ado, I'll turn the program over to her.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much, Wofford, USC Upstate, of course, James Rojas, everyone who's joining us from the community. As you know, we come together, we share a city, this great city of Spartanburg. And Spartanburg this year is 2020, 2021 is involved in a comprehensive plan, meaning a strategic plan of sorts centered around equity. We think that it is the first city in the United States that is engaged in this type of work. And I'm very lucky to serve on the think tank, thanks to Natalia Rosario, an urban planner, who brought to my attention that James Rojas, the great James Rojas, was going to be collaborating with the comp plan for Spartanburg. And we want you all to be involved. If you go to planspartanburg.com, you will find information on how to get involved. And James Rojas, I have to say that we have some friends in common for the college students out there. 100 years ago, when I was at UCLA, James Rojas studied at MIT with one of my urban planning professors, Dr. Abel Valenzuela. And he also, we have some friends in common, like Gabino Arredondo, who may be joining us from Richmond, California, Felisa Ortiz Licon from Unidos US, and so many other friends, Gerardo Sandoval, professor now in Oregon and elected official. So we have a lot of people in common, and James Rojas is so generous because he is volunteering his time to speak to us today. And he already told us that he loves Spartanburg so much that he wants to come back and still work with us. So I want to introduce you to James Rojas, who's a Latino urban planner, community activist, and artist. For the past 30 years, James Rojas has been observing, researching, and documenting the ways in which Latinos are transforming the US urban environment to fit their needs, as well as engaging and educating Latinos on urban planning. He has become one of the few nationally recognized experts on this topic and has written and lectured extensively on how culture and immigration are transforming the American landscape. What a treat to have him here. He is the founder of Latino Urban Forum, an advocacy group dedicated to increasing awareness of planning and design of these issues facing low-income Latinos. Rojas has lectured and facilitated workshops at MIT, Berkeley, Harvard, Cornell, Wofford, USC Upstate now, and numerous universities, schools, and public forums. James, welcome to the emergent Latinx place to be in the United States, Spartanburg.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And like I said, as or Sally said earlier, I should be there. I should be there in person, but because of COVID, we can't do that. But so yeah, so we'll be going through. So what I do is I kind of travel around the U.S. looking for Latino neighborhoods. I've been doing this for the past 30 years. I grew up in East LA, and I went to school at MIT. And when I was 30 years ago, and when I was in class, the teacher was talking about the good city and the bad city. I just thought, well, how do I explain East LA where I grew up? I liked it, but some people might think it's kind of a dangerous place. So I had to tell a different story of it. So I'm going to share my screen and start talking about my presentation about Latino G space. This is a picture of East LA near my grandmother's house in Boyle Heights, where every weekend this woman would put the brooms on her fence, and just, every day, every weekend would be there. She'd meet the neighbors, you talk to her, and she's like the eyes on the street. But it really kind of shows the way Latinos are changing the American landscape. With LA, the very car-centric city, it's very unfriendly for pedestrians. But Latinos, we're moving in there, and we're building relationships with this land. So that brooms, it's a relationship with the pedestrian, where on the street it's very wide and very kind of only for cars. So we're bringing in new perspectives on how to redesign the cities in a more kind of pedestrian friendly way. So I think it's so Latino urbanism, in fact, with the introduction, it's about relationships. It's about how we relate to land and others. For example, Latino comes from Latin America to the U.S., so moving to a neighborhood where either his friends live or his family lives. So also the networks start to happen. So that's the way we just kind of negotiate, our survivals through relationships. And these relationships are really deep, because a lot of us are indigenous. We have roots that go back centuries before, and so it's kind of and that's how we've kind of survived all the turmoil of Latin America with relationships and kind of building this deep connection. So unlike the U.S., where urban planning in the U.S. has always been based on, it's been transactional policy, based on, exclusion zoning and many. For example, when the Puritans came to the U.S., it was about being exclusive. We're one language, we're one community, we speak same religion. And then in Virginia, when Thomas Jefferson's house, it's about the land as a resource. It was plantations. So these two drivers kind of create American urban planning practices. Like as a city planner, you learn about the highest and best use. That's supposed to be the ultimate goal for all your decisions, right? The highest and best use. So I'm trying to argue that there's other ways of looking at cities that are not based on just the highest and best use. It's about relationships. So, for example, for Latinos, we say we come from these indigenous roots, and then we have a lot of the Spanish, a lot of the Indies from 1492. So we have a different beginning. So we have a very different way of how we start our thinking about cities and spaces. For example, for the Native Americans, it's about relationships. These are trees that have been curved for wayfinding. That's how the Native Americans did it, versus how it's symbols versus words. So for example, so when the Spanish came to the New World and created all these settlements and cities, the indigenous peoples and the slaves could not speak Spanish, so they had to use more symbolic kind of architecture and urbanism, churches and stuff like that. So then also in in the Bay Area and a lot of places in Florida, you have these places called shell mounts. Again, it's about how Native Americans understood the land, and the land was for the relationship. It wasn't a resource that you just kind of chopped up and sold off. It was just a relationship. And then, so in fact, for us as Latinos, and we all know tamales, and that's just part of our heritage. That's part of our culture, and this is like Mesoamerican, pre-Hispanic, food that even before they had comales, they had tamales. So this is kind of like, so you realize that our culture kind of weaves through these waves from centuries past. So we're kind of this kind of hybrid culture of indigenous and Spanish and all these things kind of mixing and matching. That's why I think we survive because we've been able to do that. But these kind of foods kind of tell us, hey, where do we come from? How far back do we go? So yeah, so I think so you look at Latino places and they're really visual and spatial and sensory experiences. Based on memories and aspirations. So this is San Francisco and mural there, but the whole idea of using pictures to really talk about space. And I think this goes back to Spanish when they came to the New World and how they kind of had people had to organize space, with people that didn't speak Spanish in different ways. But for us, it's kind of ways of building a relationship with the land around us. So Latinos moving to the U.S. a big number. So we move into this. We move into these kind of like puritanical, market-driven suburbs. Where there's no, it's all private. There's no plaza here. There's nothing to kind of interact with, right? So Latinos are trying to find a way to carve their niche in here. So, for example, I'll show you slides later on, but how people use front yards as a way to find create the plazas. There's no plazas here. So I'll start off. When I grew up in East LA during the '60s, and this was during the Chicano movement. It kind of rivaled it was the same time as the Civil Rights movement. African American community. But in East LA, when I grew up, a lot of it was it became about placemaking. How do you tell the Chicano story on these blank walls? So here you have the brown beret, the zoot suiter, Cesar Chavez, telling the story in a blank wall. But again, this gets back to the Spanish in colonial times, how we communicate the storytelling on the walls. And then you have places like this in San Diego, Barley Logan. Again, this is a freeway. And so this is what Latinos do. This is what Latinos build. Latinos build a relationship with the freeway, but it's kind of not with cars, but with art. So it's kind of a different way of looking at space from Latinos' perspective. This is built, right through a Latino neighborhood, and in order to push back, how culture pushes back against infrastructure and development are kind of unique in these different ways. So again, this is a kiosco in Barrio Logan. This is one of the leaders there. But again, you see this kind of creation of indigenous ideas of architecture. In fact, my friend was doing a historic preservation grant for this kiosco here, and he called me up and asked me, "What kind of architecture is this? Is it Spanish? What is it? It's just kind of indigenous, Chicano architecture, right? Very, very politically motivated. Because for the Chicano, the Indians or indigenous peoples were the heroes, so they kind of looked at this as kind of how you build a city." Yeah. But then you have Chicanos, Latinos moving in, and looking at the quinceañera, in Boyle Heights, and you see this every springtime all over, like the neighborhoods, the way people are using parks and in celebrated land and landscape with the use space. This is a Pachuca Boogie in a plaza in Boyle Heights, just a little party, a little study out there or something, but people just having fun, and again, it's just a way kind of come together, and the Central American men playing checkers and MacArthur Park. This is the way they pass their time with, but they're using bottle tops. It's nothing really fancy, but it's just the way they kind of come together, use these spaces, and they kind of form these relationships. So this is this is San Francisco. This is a sidewalk again. Like people are building these connections to spaces for pedestrians and walking. So it's how you connect to a community, through these kind of visual aids. Where this is in Riverside. This is in Riverside, in East Riverside, where the Riverside Art Museum commissioned artists to improve the way the safe routes to school for children. Artists come in and put stuff on the interactive stuff on the fence to make it a lot more interesting for people for kids to walk up from the school. But again, it shows this connection, to the space. But again, in the U.S., walking is transactional. It's a transaction. So most walking is like this. It's just there's no connection between that woman's body, and the spaces around her. And because the sidewalks are kind of driveway slopey, you can't walk on this. You can't walk on the driveway, so you walk on the street. But again, you see this whole idea about in the U.S. it's about transaction. It's not about this relationship. This one it's about a relationship with that space. Here it's just a transaction. So I think this is a bus stop in South LA. And again, somebody just built this little nicho, this little shrine, Lady Guadalupe, a bus stop. Why? I don't know. It's just there, right? But it shows a different way of looking at transportation and mobility. This is MacArthur Park. A lot of Central Americans live there, and every weekend they have these kind of tianguises, which again date back to pre-colonial times in Central America. The tianguis is where they sold things, and you have this kind of tianguises on the streets, MacArthur Park. This is the back of a bus bench, so it's being used different ways. And this is either vendors, selling at the bus stop, in East Hollywood. But again, because Latinos use public transportation the most in LA, there's vendors everywhere. Because because these people are taking the bus, they're tired, they're hungry, they'll buy a mango, they'll buy some water, and just go on their way. So as opposed to somebody that has to drive to a store, drive to a place, they just use them this way. There's a piñata. Again, how piñatas and all these little props kind of humanize again a very auto-oriented place like Los Angeles. These piñatas tell a story about place and really kind of help people understand how to navigate it. But it's very, very simple, but it makes it a lot more interesting. Again, here's a pop-up market on a fence. This fence every weekend has a different vendor. They're selling different things, but again, it's just the way people. It's just part of our heritage of how we just do business, how we have been doing probably for centuries. How space is being used. And this is La Culebra in San Francisco. This is a snake. And it's showing kids a rich texture, rich details that they can touch this thing, making it very rich and kind of, again, building that kind of sense of, relationship with the landscape. This is a parking lot shrine. This is Mercado in Boyle Heights, and this is a parking lot, but again, they have this big, beautiful shrine there, and it's really popular, but if you look at most parking lots in the U.S., you never find a shrine there, because that's a different land use, a different zoning code, and people never think about an asphalt parking lot being a sacred space. Again, it's a different relationship that Latinos be bringing this really different relationships to looking at spaces and feeling spaces in different ways. This is a very popular place. This is LA's alleys. It's Cayons, and before it was just a place where people would sell stuff. On the weekends, now it's this huge market that's kind of makes a lot of money, and people pay higher rent than they do in Beverly Hills because it's all cash. People come in from even Mexico to come shopping here. And then you have places like this. These are old factories in South LA that have been turned into big mercados, big swap meets. So they'll have masses mariachis here and they have different places here. But people come here, you'll find a community in Los Angeles. This is their plaza. This is where they come to find each other and kind of find, things to do. So it's kind of like how Latinos deal with the lack of plaza. They kind of create their own. This is a storefront in Minneapolis. Again, you have all these different things there. You have the angel from Mexico City. You have all the different eagles and stuff like this. But again, it kind of shows the way Latinos are kind of transforming spaces that were not designed that way. But it kind of shows this kind of way of thinking about space in a different way, using art and creativity. This is your very own from South Carolina. This is an international market. And again, you see this kind of ways that people are, you see, you'll see there's different levels of Latino investment in properties. From the first one being a store like this, the second one being a butcher shop, and the third one being a tortilleria. Once you have a tortilleria, you arrived because that's the biggest investment in the business. So this is the way Latinos start to build up their capital and build up their sense of who they are, build a sense of place. And again, you see the products, napales and different things like that, and the candles and piñatas. But again, the products that we connect with. Yeah, this is in Woodburn, Oregon. Woodburn, Oregon is like the central Latino space in Eastern Oregon. This is where all the people that take care of the Christmas trees, live around here in the hillside of the mountains around Oregon, Eastern Oregon. They call the Pinos, and Woodburn is a direct bus route from Mexico to East LA to Oregon. So this has been big transit centers. What happened here is that they had a vacant lot, and the city turned into a plaza based on a plaza in Michoacan, where people came from, in this area. And now it's in fact, even planted palm trees in Oregon. You use these palm trees that you have in South Carolina, in Oregon. And every year they have a big celebration called the Taste of Woodburn. It's been this cultural phenomena there. People, all the tourists come there and congregate and have food, So it's been, dancing and stuff like that. But yes, this is also a place in Los Angeles, in the Valley, where people turn this whole these old storefronts into the puestos behind it, behind Van Boulevard, to green, orange, and red little squares of puestos for small businesses. This is area of small businesses that they took away the parking spaces and made them into a little pedestrian way because two or 3,000 square foot space people can't rent, but they can rent a 20 by 20 space, little box. That changes there. And this is Guadalajara, Mexico, and this is a City Hall in Guadalajara with the City Hall and the kiosco. Then we have this in Linwood in Southern California, Plaza Mexico. This is like the ultimate Latino shopping mall. This guy is a developer with a Korean born in Mexico City that wanted to build the ultimate Latino shopping experience. So he took every landmark in Mexico and put it in this one shopping mall. The kiosco, the facades, all this stuff, and even the trees. So it looks like Mexico. So what happens? So what happens here is that people that can't go back to Mexico will bring their kids here, but they tell them this is life in Mexico. With the plaza and stuff like this, even the benches and all the lights. I think it's a way to kind of build culture and kind of build that relationship to places. And so I also looked at homes, and this is an interesting kind of diagram. We have you have the traditional Mexican house with the courtyard, the sala in the center. And then you have the American house with the front yard and backyard. And you have a Latino house, with the fence around it and the big porch and kind of this hybrid kind of architecture. It kind of looks like this. That house on top was probably just the house on top is probably just a little wooden building, little wooden shack. But then it got remodeled by Latinos, and they stuck with the walls. They put in wrought iron windows. They put in the big porch. You can see the line with the big porches. They put arches. Then they put in the balustrade in the front yard. And then 20 years later, the house has been redesigned again. But again, because a lot of Latinos, they work in construction in Los Angeles, this is an easy job for them to do. They'll do this over the weekend with their friends. Build porches and build fences and all these things. But a lot of them work in construction, so they have the kind of means to do this kind of work. Yes, but you go to places like New Mexico, where you do the old adobes, built by the Hispanos, back in the 15th century. And again, you see that relationship with the land, with the dirt and the land, and how these architecture has evolved from that kind of place, and it's very rich, in details and relationships, with the landscape. Yeah. So what happens is that basically is that so when Latinos buy a house in the suburbs. There is no plaza there. So what do they do, right? They'll put a plaza in their front yard. So what they do, they put a front yard fence. Around their front yard, they put a fence around it. And then that becomes their kind of little plaza in the front yard. And what happens though is that the threshold of the house moves from the front door to the front gate. In typical suburbs, people walk up to the front door and that's the threshold. But at least LA, or like your neighborhood, it's always the front gate. So I did my research. I always did it from the front gate. It's an easy way to talk to you. And then you see these really fancy. This is in Denver. You see really fancy front yard fences. That really kind of celebrate the culture and the kind of this guy probably works construction in Denver to build a fence like that. And this is in New York City. Same kind of style, same kind of fence. Same idea. So this is in Detroit, Michigan. You see the fence there with the soccer balls on it. So I'm sure that's Latino guys like soccer. People live there, so they built the fences like it. So it really changed. You see this pattern all over the country emerging. And then then I was telling you earlier is that these the front door, the front gate, the front fence become the point of interaction. People start building again. This is a relationships. This is where relationships are kind of reinforced in the built environment. When I did my research, I did it at the front gate. It's a great place, especially in Southern California, to talk to people. I saw in Orange, there's a group of women, talking, on the way to the market. So yeah, we also have markets. Have little tianguis in their front yard fence. who are selling stuff. And you have really fancy architecture in Brownsville, Texas. This is a Latino house in Brownsville, and you see the front yard fence being stylized. You see the little gateway, you see the fountain. Very, very, heavy investment in this architectural style. But you can see it's kind of the American suburb kind of changed in different kind of ways to kind of fit into the culture. This is New Mexico. Again, a really simple Mexican house. It's probably been there for probably centuries. But again, you see the chiles on there. So so what's happening like in Los Angeles. You'll see Latinos will buy a house and they'll add a Latino facade on the American house. So behind the arches is the old American house. So they had this really nice porch with the arches, the eyes on the street, and and really thinking about weather and climate and really kind of making these kind of outdoor spaces, these kind of patio spaces. This is in Philadelphia. This is a Puerto Rican neighborhood in Philadelphia, and it's really dangerous. But what they did there is that they call them the balconies. They took the balconies that you see in Puerto Rico on the second floor, and they put it on their patio, their porches on the first floor. They have these kind of enclosed because there's a lot of drugs and dangerous people in this neighborhood. This is how they kind of create their sense of community behind these kind of really beautiful wrought iron balconies. And again, this is like a house in Southern California. This is how they're thinking Palmdale, Riverside, from a little far away, where Latino buys a house and all of a sudden becomes his little hacienda, so little rancho, in the U.S. So this is really important to a lot of Latinos. They have this space, having this land, having this connection to the land. So it really changes, how we think about cities. Here's the fountain, and one of these houses, and this is a house in East LA. This is a good example where this guy turned his front yard into a little plaza. He has a fountain in there. He has a light pole. You'll see in Mexico, and the plaza's there in the front yard. So again, it's a way to really think about, how do you have a memory, you have a need, you have an aspiration. This is all about aspirations, how we look at the future and how it kind of, how it's going to look for us and how we kind of talk about it, or formalize it in different ways. So a lot of these front yards become really active, party zones or social zones. This is Abuelita's front yard in Brownsville, Texas. Again, this is like my grandma's front yard. She would take care of me. But she always had little plants and tchotchkes in her front yard, and I thought it was great. So, but this is how kind of culture gets passed down to the next generation. The plaza becomes the front yard, and this is how we kind of inherit these spaces kind of created by your grandmothers. Always happy memories, happy thoughts. This is the Latino man cave. This is an alley in Boyle Heights. So again, you see the alleyway, and you see the alley, and you see the car, and you see the sofa back there. But again, this is the way so these are very kind of gendered spaces that way. Who belongs where. This is another house in East LA. Again, you see this beautiful mural in the house. Just because they put a mural there, but it kind of creates a connection to that space. A little deeper, and the plants are really important too. So these are palm trees. These are corn in the front yard. But you see a lot of different hierbas and herbs from Latin American in front yards in East LA. Again, these are probably ancient, pre-Hispanic, plants that just kind of survived through time that come with people. So the Casita in New York City, again, using, lands. These are vacant lots in New York, and the city turned them into little gardens for the Puerto Rican residents. This is the front yard business in East LA where they're selling birria, on Sundays. Again, the front yard is being used a different way. But again, this kind of builds a connection to community. People neighbors buy from here. You start talking to people and start building kind of the social networks that we need, And the shrines are also really, really popular. The way to kind of create your space and kind of talk about it. And then we have dead altars in some neighborhoods now, so that's really become really popular too now. But again, it's a way to have these kind of public, private interventions, on streets to make it feel a lot more connected to the community. This is a Nacimiento, in East LA, Boyle Heights. And, in fact, a couple of years ago, me and my friends would do Nacimiento tours Boyle Heights. Just look at all the different altars. Most of them a lot of them are made by women, and a lot of them are very much folk art. You just kind of made, Christmas trees, you buy a lot of decoration, but here, it's just you use what you have, and you have a kind of very Wisquacha kind of architectural design here. But it's very interesting and very unique to see what people use to make their those outside. This is like I worked in this park in Boyle Heights. Boyle Heights has very few parks and a lot of cemeteries. So a lot of Latinos would jog around the cemetery. So this cemetery, particularly Evergreen, is a mile and a half with only one driveway, which is a miracle in Los Angeles to have that much sidewalk with only one driveway. So Latinos would jog here, but the sidewalk became very, very old and broken. So we had to go out to the city. My friend designed a Calavera. It says "Run in Peace." The way to kind of organize for this campaign. So we got the city to cough up $800,000 to build a rubberized track around this whole cemetery. So now people in Boyle Heights call it the gym. We're going to go to the gym. Maybe this place. But yeah, again, it's kind of the sidewalk. It's it's just kind of just what it is. It's an active place, but it's an active recreation zone, but it's not a park. So it's just kind of an interesting way to use these kind of spaces. But again, this is kind of innovation that Latinos are bringing into the U.S. to make it a lot more walkable, a lot more sustainable, a lot more usable. Yeah, so a lot of the work I do is based on century-based planning. How can we really kind of tap into Latinos' ideas of space to make better cities? Using our census to do that. So a lot of stuff I just showed you is all about this century-based experiences Latinos create and build. To design a plaza on the rancho in Mexico using objects, stuff like that. They're working in Riverside, working on South Colton, and they're doing a plan. They're using objects to get Latinos to express themselves about their spaces, about what they want to see in their communities. But using the hands, it takes the pressure off of how to use words. So it becomes a really easy way to kind of create self-expression. This is a shelter in place. This is the front yard of Boyle Heights. Again, people just create these kind of spaces, in Boyle Heights or their neighborhoods. They're very lush, but they're very much connected to this landscape. It's not a place of beauty, it's not a place of fun. It's just a place, and it's all about how people. Okay, we talked about earlier with the Native Americans, how having these landscape of just relationships. This is just all about relationships here, of all the plants and the people being. But there's a different aesthetic, when it comes to planning. Yeah, so I think Latinos, we have a really strong relationship to space, and it's all about economic survival, cultural and social preservation. So yes, this is the end of my presentation. So this is my email address and my website, and we're having a book coming out in Island Press in 2021, in probably a couple of months end of the year. So keep an eye out for it. So that concludes my presentation. So now questions and answers. Go to Araceli.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, James. I got a sneak peek of your presentation last week, and I texted my siblings in California, in Riverside, and I said, you have to check out James Rojas, because we're going to understand our father's art better. It's true. So many of our homes, we buy them a certain way, and then we add fountains and kioscos and the arches. It's true. You don't really think about it, and all of a sudden your parents have transformed the house. But I didn't think that what they were trying to do was turn the house into a plaza, and maybe that nostalgia. So I'm gonna have to bring you to Paris so that you can give me a reading of the house. But wow. And can you tell us a little bit about one very important memory you had as a child that got you to think about space?
Well, I think growing up, I grew up in my grandmother's front yard, and we always had our cousins there, and we always had the family parties there. So it was like a plaza. We had it was very active. Even though I never lived in Mexico, I understood the plaza from my grandmother's front yard. Because people during the weekend, the men would play poker there, play cards, and then the Mexican ladies would be there with their cooking their stuff out there, and so it was kind of this place where you just thought, this is life. We were all coming together. We were all working together, coming together. It's just like how life should be. So it's not until you grow up you realize that life isn't always like that. But it was fun, and I thought, so my work is always trying to figure out, with that kind of childhood memory, how do I understand the city from that perspective? So what do I see that creates these kind of interactions? Because I'm Latino, I see the interactions, and how do I look at the built environment that promotes it? Because I think, especially in South Carolina, you have a lot of really nice architecture there, and you have a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of walkable places. But again, a lot of that architecture is driven by architects. Like you have this kind of urbanist thinking where architects will say, if you build a narrow street, build a porch, you build a fence, people will talk to each other, which is correct. But in East LA, Latino neighborhoods, they do it naturally. And nobody's telling your parents to build arches and porches and fountains and fences. They're just doing it because it feels good to them. It feels right to them, and it just feels from their body. It's just more of a sensory experience, not an intellectual exercise. So it's how to understand that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Wow, and James Rojas, I see that the chat is on fire. So you're reminding people of Birria, that's for Mauricio. Natalia Rosario, a planner, makes really good observations. I don't know if Natalia wants to unmic and point out what she's seen, how our cultures here in the US, the 3D fashion that has really resonated with her, moving from Miami to South Carolina to see that difference. So James, when you travel around the country, do you feel that Latino culture is so different? As you have said, we got here, our timelines are different from different places, immigrants, some of us, the border crossed us. Do you see some patterns as you travel?
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff is, there's a lot of patterns here. Because since we have the same kind of root beginning, we understand all these things that are happening. People ask me, well, what's the El Salvadorian front yard? It's like, well, it's the same as everybody else's front yard. It's Latino front yards are all the same kind of pattern language is there. But I think, so I think you see a lot. In fact, I was in Detroit. I went to Detroit one time, and people said, well, what's this guy from East LA going to tell us about our neighborhood here, right? So I get a presentation, and after I get a presentation, the residents give me a map of all the Latino homes in Detroit I have to go see. Because they say, oh yeah, houses like that, and down the street. But I think people, so the pattern is there. It's growing. When I did my research 30 years ago, I focused on East LA because that was kind of the center of Latino culture back 40, 30, 50 years ago, right? But now you have Latinos in Spartanburg and South Carolina and Minneapolis, and these are very new communities, maybe like 20 or 30 years old, but yet the same patterns happening. Wow. So I use the same template that kind of from East LA, you can apply it all over the country. So it works, it works that way.
And I see here from comments that people are also mentioning saints, that a lot of Latinos, have their saints out in the front yard, of course, inside, pictures of saints, of pottery, flowers.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's interesting because this woman in LA documents Our Lady of Guadalupe murals all over South LA, and you see them everywhere, right? So I've been thinking about it's like an urban design tool for us, Lady of Guadalupe mural, because it's a picture, it's a figure, and we all have these emotional connections to her. So all of a sudden, like it could be a dead end street or a parking lot becomes a sacred space. It had a different relationship to the space now from that image. So I think it's interesting how, like, I was thinking about when they stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Oh, that's a sacred space too. That's space that we all have a spot for. A sacred spot for. So we create the spaces in our communities that are sacred to us, that have meaning and value to us. And and it's important for us to have these kind of spaces. For us, we do it. Latinos, we do it naturally. That's just what we do. We can't really stop ourselves from doing it. It just happens. It just comes out that way. So I think it's just how we really use the land as our tool to understand ourselves and kind of, we understand our communities through land and landscape and building things. So I think that's where our power lies, in landscape and land.
Mm, fascinating. And here, Janet Vasquez, one of the Alianza members and community leader, she's thinking about, you're bringing back memories of her Puerto Rican grandparents and dominoes being played in New York City in the park by Latino men. She mentions that here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, we don't have large Latino neighborhoods. We have the Arcadia area, but we still don't see that distinctive those Latino neighborhoods. What do you when you were asked to participate in this comp plan? What did you think? Did you think that in Spartanburg there would be a Latino presence? Well, if you don't mind sharing with us.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think there were Latinos in Spartanburg. I know Charleston, I know, parts of Florida, but I never, like, we're such a hidden culture sometimes. Like you have to go to the fringes of the city to find Latinos, and yes, I didn't really think there were Latinos there. But I think what's interesting though is that, like a lot of the work Latinos do, how we use communities is all about the plaza and all about relationships. So I think for us as pioneer communities, we have to build spaces for that. For example, I was working in Denver, in this suburb called Westwood, just a typical kind of boring American suburb, just little houses and big streets. So, but all the Latinos were telling us there, it was a health project. That was telling us, we have nowhere to walk. We have nowhere to go. We want to walk around, we have nowhere to go. So I told the city, why don't you just take a vacant parking lot and build a little plaza there? And they love the idea. Now they have a place to go to meet their neighbors and talk to people and just kind of hang out. I think that's just kind of what we want. We want this, but yeah, like in Los Angeles, for instance, there isn't any zoning code for a plaza. It's either going to be a park, it's going to be a bus stop, it's going to be something else, but not a plaza. So I think it's how do we articulate these new needs, these land use needs for our community? I think because we're not going to fit into the mold of transactional planning that Americans are founded on. We have a different kind of way of looking at space through relationships, and we need to build communities from relationships. And what kind of spaces do we create to kind of harness that energy and kind of reinforce these kind of connections that we have?
Absolutely. And, if I may say so, it was Dr. Laura Barbas Rhoden and Wofford staff and faculty and students who initially founded Alianza Spartanburg. And in a way that became like the plaza. We don't have a place where we meet. But right now we're meeting over Zoom because of the pandemic. But I think that people really responded to that initial idea that our friends at Wofford had, and that is, we need a place to have dialogue, to come together, to share, and would maybe you're going to help us lobby for a plaza.
Yeah, you definitely
Plaza
should.
Spartanburg.
Well, but now you can lobby yourself. You know exactly why you need one.
Absolutely, no. This is good. This is a dangerous idea. But here I want to read to you a fascinating comment. This is enlightening. I always thought my mom had a fountain and arches fetish. I think a lot of us are feeling that right now. It finally clicked why our families have certain styles. And I see so many comments coming in here. So throughout the South, so our Plaza de los Pobladores and Plaza de Cesar Chavez in San Jose, California, are technically parks, and they are managed and maintained by Parks and Recreation. I wonder if you've been to San Jose.
They have some beautiful parks. It's a really beautiful facility down there. But again, it's a very kind of one-off. Because I think, because I have a lot of friends that work in parks, in LA, and they're telling me, vacant lots to build parks, but they're telling me, well, people can't sell here. If anyone wants to set up shops in the park. In fact, when I was working with Gerardo in Eugene, Oregon, we did a project on how to get Latinos to use parks more in Eugene. One of the issues was having vendors in parks. But people don't think about parks as having vendors in them. They go to Mexico City. There's a lot of vendors in the park. So but the park, so you can't really have vendors. It becomes very kind of you have to go through kind of different kind of loops. So I think it's really thinking about what could a park be? Like the Evergreen Cemetery jogging path, kind of a park, but it's not really a park. It's a sidewalk. But I think so how do we kind of make make planning more flexible? Kind of having different kind of needs. I know in LA, a lot of my friends they work on these park projects, but then the community says, well, we want to have a vendor here. Well, you can't. It's against the law. It's a park. So we have to expand. Planning and really kind of embrace different ways of being in the U.S. So parks can just have vendors in them. In fact, LA just legalized vending, like 4 or 5, probably 3 years ago. And that was we had them for decades, and they were just all illegal. But now we're legalize them.
Absolutely. And I know I have a couple of questions, one from Natalia Valenzuela Swanson, and I'm looking for it. I don't know if Laura, you want to unmic and share that with us?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. James, you talked about how Latinos create their spaces, the arches, the fountains, the moving of the threshold. And the question from Natalia is, what do cities need to do to allow that to happen organically and naturally, to encourage it and not inhibit it?
Yeah, well, I think we have to be less restrictive with their planning guidelines, because I think planners, like for example, like me as a Latino, I grew up in East LA, but most planners come from very suburban middle class backgrounds where everything's either right or wrong. You're in compliance or not in compliance. So if you have that attitude, things can't really change because it's always going to be wrong. It's always going to be right. But for Latinos, it's always about survival and how things are. It's about survival. If my neighbor in East LA has chickens in his front yard, that's what he does, right? That's what they do, right? That's or whatever it is. But I think it's kind of how we look at people being themselves and being able to live together rather than saying, okay, we're gonna control everybody's space, therefore that's gonna make people connect. It's a very different mentality. It's like when you buy from a street vendor, you got to talk to the street vendor and tell them I want to have a tostada or taco with X, Y, and Z in it. Or as opposed to go to a restaurant, you tell a restaurant I want number 1 or number 2. That's all you say, right? So it's a very different way of connecting to people. And I think it's their neighborhoods too. People make things different in their neighborhood because it's what you can do, and people like that. Where in other neighborhoods, it's all about compliance. Especially in the Midwest, you have all the same color houses, same color, everything's uniform.
Wow. And I just noticed that we have 4 questions. Somehow I was just looking at the chat because it's so alive. But as yes, I have a couple of questions. One from Mauricio Orozco, who works with the South Carolina Commission of Minority Affairs. He's a friend. He's always joining us. Do you think that Latinos have inspired other communities to adopt aspects of urban planning? And I'll go ahead and ask you about Patricia Vivas, who says California and South Carolina are very different. What is your impression about the Latino housing here? And you answered that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll go to Maurice's question. And I think, I think a lot of it's called cultural appropriation. Now food trucks are really popular. A lot of them came out of East LA, because the food trucks, loncheros, were happening because people were working in places that didn't have access to food. So they had these lonchero food trucks that go out there, and it were usually women that ran the truck because they cook. But now food trucks are everywhere in the U.S. But that's kind of a Latino appropriation of an activity. Also, Instagram. Instagram is very visual, very it's a very visual messaging, and that comes from the Spanish. All these visual murals that Spanish created. It's very visual, and now that's kind of how people communicate in Instagram. But that's how we communicate in our neighborhoods through visuals. So I think there's a lot of influences. The cultural Latinos are really influencing the U.S. culture now. Just in our different ways of being and kind of and they pick up on what we're doing and do it differently, but it's kind of the same idea. But I think we allow different ways of being in the U.S. that we can now think about as being kind of normal now. Before it was very much, black and white. Now we're kind of have a different kind of way of thinking about space and new possibilities.
Wow. And here Margaret tells us that she's so delighted with this conversation. We've seen so many of those comments. Thank you, James. I know that Dr. Tim Morrell, who's an expert in South Carolina, the teaching environment, and now he's in Bakersfield, at Cal State Bakersfield, and he's a big fan of your Rascuache theory. Can you tell us a little bit, even though he's not asking that, but I know him. Can you tell us a little bit, what is Rascuache and how does that fit into what you do?
Well, it's kind of it's kind of the word that nothing's perfect. Things are a little bit broken. It's not like right and wrong, but it kind of works. So people kind of use the term kind of in a negative way. It's kind of like this little broken thing, but it still works, but it's broken now. So I think it's kind of thinking about how these communities are kind of they're not perfect in the sense of urban planning perfection, but they still work, and how there's kind of a beauty in that kind of Rascuache style. It's like your abuelita's front yard. It's full of tchotchkes, full of things. And it's all about her creating a relationship with her yard and her objects and people and the community. But it's not based like, it's not an architect telling you have to have all white pots, you have to have all this height, and this is that kind of Rascuache kind of DIY stuff she does, but it has a lot of heart to it. It has a lot of emotion, a lot of relationship to it. So,
just like teaching, right? Dr. Morrell, you say that Rascuache teaching as culturally responsive education and teaching. Absolutely. And I think Armando Llorente, who's joining us from the snow up north, I think if I understand the question, since I see so many things here in the chat, have you seen fusions of, for example, in East LA, we have large Asian American communities, Korean food and Mexican food. There's fusions. There are even Netflix shows about that. Do you see also how other cultures in the United States, maybe that's closer to Armando Llorente's question, have influenced also Latino urbanism?
I think there's a lot of fusion, because even it kind of goes both ways. Mm-hmm. Because even like even in fact, when Latinos move back to Mexico, they take with them their front yard. Mm-hmm. You see a lot of new developments in Mexico with little front yards now. So you see this kind of like, so it's kind of fusion of these kind of different ways of looking at yards. And I think because they're bringing back all these different ways of kind of thinking about space. So I think there's a lot of fusion between the different groups of people and kind of understanding, that there's different ways of being in this country. It's not just like we're one way. We're Puritans, and therefore, and I think that's what happened is that you think about the Puritans, they came over and they were very kind of exclusive with their language and who they were. So the Native Americans didn't have a role in that community, so it never evolved together. But we're evolving all the time with different kind of things, right? We're evolving different ways with different groups of people. It's always been about us mixing. When the Spanish came over, we were somewhere in the bottom, but we were somewhere mixing with the Spanish, and it was always this kind of fusion. So I think that's what gives us our strength, is how we can fuse things together and adopt. So like what I'm showing you today was always the way Latinos are adopting to the American suburb, and they're making it better because they're making it more walkable, more sustainable. They give it a different sense of what a suburb could be like in the U.S. Because sometimes we think of suburbs, we've just been like, well, they're boring spaces, but Latinos somehow can make them different, make them into different kind of spaces, and they become rich in culture and different, and they become rich in meaning for people. So it's really thinking about, when thinking about city planning is being more relational and less transactional, you know, with different things. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of fusions that go. In fact, I was working in Fruitvale, taking pictures out there about neighborhoods, and all of a sudden I posted some on Facebook, and one of my Asian friends said, "Oh, that's my house." Because a lot of Asians live in Fruitvale. That's your neighborhood in Oakland, but you never know it because you all are integrated into the neighborhood. And you think about, what would it be like if you were an Asian that grew up in East LA? That would be your sense of what America is all about. So I think you see a lot of fusion taking place in these different communities, between all the different cultures through the landscapes.
Thank you. And I have a couple of questions here. One is from Ivan Segura. A lot of us here know who Ivan Segura is. He's the leader with the Palmetto Luna Arts. And James, I've mentioned that, he's someone we should collaborate for the next event we have with you. Ivan asked, can you comment on gentrification displacement happening in historically Latinx communities? For example, in Chicago's Logan Square neighborhoods, if you're familiar with them, is there a good, respectful way for that to happen? And another question from his colleague, our friend too, Mauricio Orozco, both of them from the South Carolina Commission on Minority Affairs. Speaking of South Florida, have you been to, and I may completely mispronounce, Hialeah, or I probably said that incorrectly, but maybe Laura wants to help me.
Yeah, I think for the gentrification question, I think that's the big issue right now with Latinos, because Latinos, again, because we haven't made our voice clear in the urban planning process, we can't defend our spaces, because urban planning is just a way of upholding your values. So if you uphold a single family home as sacred, then that becomes embedded to the urban planning process. And maybe we're not, and if we don't uphold, multifamily housing or affordable housing as being part of it, part of the community as a value, then it disappears. So I think for us as Latinos, we have to say, what are our values in our community, and how do we turn them into policy to give them to either protect and enhance our communities. Otherwise, if we don't put a value to it, people aren't going to value it otherwise. It's going to say, well, it's up for grabs. It's poor Mexicans, so it's developed. And I think that's the problem, is that I think most people, like East LA, for example, like, Challenge Ravine, all the Boyle Heights, all the fields, my family has been displaced many times because of infrastructure, right? And for a lot of Americans, well, it's progress. We need to build affordable housing, therefore your house has to go, right? So because there is no respect for relationships. You can have been there for like 5 generations, you can have been there for 30 years, but yet there's no respect for that at all. It's just it's all highest and best use. So I think that's where you get into is kind of like, so I think we have to change the way we understand cities and put a value on relationships. People have been there for like 50 years, well, that should be respected. That should be part of the plan. I think it has to be a way we think about, changing the way we do planning, not just highest and best use, because, or not, it has to be respected. So I think that kind of attitude, wiped out the Native Americans. We saw land as a resource, they chopped everything down and got rid of all the trees and just exploited it. But if it was more relationship, then you have more respect for land and other people, and you can kind of live in harmony with each other, and just always, combative.
Well, thank you. Our time is almost up, and perhaps this is the last question from Armando up there in the snow. I fled the snow. I used to live in New Jersey. So he asked about, what do you see in 2022, 3 to 5 years down the road, in terms of city planning, Latino urbanism?
Well, I think just because our numbers are growing, you're going to see changes in cities, but it's up to us, as community leaders to really articulate and share that vision with everybody else. So most of my work I do is with grassroots people. I want that college kid in college to understand why her mother built that front yard, fountain, or the arches or something. Because I think if we can start to articulate, get rid of our self doubt. This is who we are, so we do, and just start changing the urban policies to really enhance who we are. So I think a lot of Latinos, they have self doubt. Well, I'm poor. I grew up in a garage, therefore that has no value to anybody. But that's kind of like the old way of thinking. Like whenever I present whenever I present Latin America with scholars, they always say, "Well, those are just poor people being poor." But I tell them, no, that's poor people being create their own space. It's very different because they're going to create spaces based on what they need and what they want, and that's how we start from. We have to start from the bottom, work way up, and giving people the tools to articulate what their ideas are, how they can shape the city in better ways.
Wow, and maybe I am going to sneak in one little last question. Dr. Laura Barbas Rhoden and myself were professors at Wofford College, USC Upstate. Any closing thoughts to our college students? How to make their campus more feel like home?
Yeah.
What is their urbanism footprint?
Well, just start to articulate what you like about your community, your space, what makes it great, and then figure out how do I expand that. So what I do, in fact, I'm working right now in Long Beach doing workshops where on zoning. So we're having people build their favorite child memory as a starting point. Okay, talk about your favorite child memory, build it, being with grandma or being at the park or climbing a tree, whatever. Then now build. I tell people that memory is your DNA for city planning. That's your vision. That's why we're here. We're not here to build more transportation or more housing. We're here to uphold your story, make that story be part of this bigger picture, and and then have your story shape the infrastructure rather than have infrastructure shaping you. So obviously we had people build that, and the second part was we told people now build your favorite place to go in Long Beach. Build it and tell us why you like it. And then they did, right? And now I'm telling them that's when you go to the urban planning meeting, that's what you tell the city. I want more of this because it's the way I like. Rather than complain, just say I want more of the good stuff. So that people can get what they want because they're happier doing that kind of stuff than complaining. Yeah, so just have your students think about what they if they have them think about, have them write about, build a favorite child memory, then think about the places they'd like to go to now and how can they make the campus more like that.
Fascinating. And we know what our parents want, thanks to your talk. They want fountains, kioscos, arches, right? Well, I want to thank Dr. Laura Barbas Rhoden, Martin, everyone behind the scenes who organized it all. I want to thank all of you who joined us. If you want to hear more about Alianza Spartanburg, check out our Facebook page. But also, please get involved with the city comp plan, the process. It's very artistic, and the city wants to hear from you. Thank you so much. My colleague, Dr. Esther Godfrey, who uses literary analysis and engages with urban planning theory. She thanks you too, as well as students and community leaders. Thank you all. Thank you, James Rojas. Muchas gracias.
Hopefully I'll be there in person one day. Spartanburg.
Please. Well, I'll take you out to Mezcal.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yes, you too, Tim. I'll take you to Mezcal. Everyone.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, no, it's it'd be fun to go out there and do some more work out there, do workshops and stuff.
Absolutely. It's a college town, and young folks and non-traditional students, they want to learn. They want to make the city more their own, and we also want to keep talent here.
Yeah. But you could just invigorate the talent, inspire the talent, bring out the talent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It was really fun. Inviting
Thank
me
you.
and to sharing my stories and hopefully inspiring people to look at their neighborhood in a different way now.
Thank you so much. We want to thank everyone here. I see Dr. Colby King, who's a sociologist. I'm sure that a lot of our colleagues in different disciplines are going to be bringing back to their classrooms some of these very fascinating ideas about placemaking.
Yeah. It's really fun to get people to really empower them in a really simple perspective, right? Just see something in a very different way changes your whole perspective of it.
Yes, and Dr. King talks about how this is very interesting for urban sociology courses. Wow.
Yeah, it is, because I think when I was doing my research, I was using sociology, anthropology, and architecture and try to combine them together. Because you have sociologists talking about relationships, but not really talking about places they're taking place at. Then you have anthropology that kind of pulls from why people do what they do, and it got kind of all converged in this kind of research. It's such a rich field to study this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, Jan Vasquez was asking about what's that word somewhat broken? Rascuache. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Araceli and James, thank you so much. I feel like this is like our Alianza meetings and we all just talk the night away.
Yeah.
We're in that relational space again. So thank you so much for co-creating it. And Martin, thank you as well for the recording. I know you have to edit out our parting comments with the 20 folks still here, but thank you very much.
Yeah. Next time we'll do a workshop. Virtual workshop. That'd be really fun.
Yes, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And I hope you have a lovely evening there in California.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, James. Thanks,
Join us.
Araceli.